Hello, everyone. I'm Chelsea Shammy Calder, and I am your session host today. Last in this theater, but certainly not least, we have Kevin and Amy from PTSB, and they're going to be sharing enhancing ECL model performance in banking. So please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm sure we're all eager to go see Brene Brown, so we're going to try and keep this as brief as possible and fly through some of these slides. So we're here to talk about leveraging SaaS cloud analytic services in SaaS Viya and just some of the enhancements that is made to our ECL model in banking. So just to give a brief introduction as to who we are PTSB. We are one of three pillar banks in Ireland. We're a retail bank who focus mainly on consumer and personal finance. We do a small bit of SME and corporate lending, but it's a very small part of our portfolio. We are based out of Dublin, Ireland, with some offices in Cork and the 98 branches around the country. We employ 2,500 people and serve over 1.1 million customers around Ireland. Not too bad for a country of 5 million people. We're one of Ireland's oldest banks with roots over 200 years, and we have been a SaaS customer for 15 of those years. So that's sort of who we work for, but who are we? So I'm Kevin. I work in the Central Data and Analytics Office of PTSB. I'm the Senior Manager of our Analytics Platforms and Processes team. I've been working with the bank for over 12 years now, and I'm more involved in the processes rather than the platform side of things, but our team would be responsible for managing like credit databases, implementation of regulatory models, so stuff like capital risk-weighted assets. We do a lot of we're going to be taking on some of the treasury assets like ALM and IRBB, and of course IFRS 9 ECL, which we're going to be talking about today.
Thanks, Kevin. So my name's Amy Buckley. I've been with PTSB just coming up on 3 years now. I'm also in the Analytics Platforms and Processes team. I'm more on the platform side, so my team manages the SaaS platforms across the bank. We're responsible for keeping them online, updating them, answering any user queries, and responding to any issues that anyone's having. So my team will be heavily involved with the migration over to Viya. So yeah, that's a little bit about me. So then for the reason we're here today. So what we're going to walk you through first, Kevin's going to bring you through the background to the ECL and what that's all about and the current way the processes ran, or the previous way the processes ran and how we migrated that over to Viya. Then we're going to talk about the steps migrating it over to Viya, and then finally we're going to chat through the outcomes, benefits, and best practices we've determined from this process. So just before we get into that, I'm going to give you an overview of the SaaS infrastructure at PTSB. So we have 80 Linux servers across 2 data centers. We have 7 SaaS environments. So we're based across SaaS 9.4 and Viya 3.5. The 2 main ones we're going to chat through today are the MIP platform, so the Model Implementation Platform, and Risk and Finance, RNF. They're both hosted on 9.4. Then we have an ALM platform also hosted on 9.4. And then we have our Viya environment. So we have our master dev environment. It's in the name, it's our development environment for all our Viya platforms. That's where we have moved the ECL process over to. Then we also have some intelligent decisioning servers, VA servers, and some batch servers. Across the stack, we have over 10.5 terabytes of memory, and there are over 360 internal users. Kevin mentioned that we have 98 branches across the country, so a lot of those would use the VA aspect of Viya and host dashboards and use that for their daily reporting. So how are these applications used in PTSB? So the SaaS 9.4 stack is mainly used for credit risk modeling. The MIP platform is used for our ECL solution, which we're going to chat through today. We also use 9.4 for our IRR, so the interest rate risk. And then we use our ALM platform for asset liability management. So then up until this year, we weren't really utilizing our SaaS Viya platforms. We mainly use it for intelligent decisioning, so that's used for all our lending in the bank. So it determines the decisions for mortgages, term loans, credit cards, branch loans. And then we also have the FIA, which is mainly used across the branches for dashboarding. So we wanted to move some of our processes from 9.4 to FIA, so now FIA also is used for ECL process. On that, Kevin's going to give you some background to ECL and what it is.
Cheers. Thank you, Amy. Yeah, so for the non-bankers in the room, ECL is your expected credit losses of the bank. It's effectively a measure of a bank's credit risk. Think of it as the bank's provisions, or sort of the amount of money that a bank has to put away in case customers start defaulting on their loans and can't pay back. It's those sort of losses that the bank will incur from those events. There's strong regulatory control around what we can and can't do in terms of calculating expected credit loss. The regulations which outline this is IFRS 9, or International Financial Reporting Standards 9. This came into effect in 2018. It's mandatory within the EU and other parts of the world. I don't believe it's mandatory within the US, or a quick Google search led me to believe that the US equivalent is the GAAP CECL, which is generally accepted accounting principles, or current expected credit loss. So forgive me if I don't have the details right. It's looking at it more from the European side. The key features under ECL calculations is that you bucket all your accounts into one of three stages. So stage 3 is what's your credit impaired. This is anything that's in default or non-performing loan, the bad cases. Stage 1 are the guys that they pay back their loans each month in full and on time. They're very low risk, very stable. You're not expecting to incur much losses on those. Stage 2 are the guys kind of in the middle. They're still performing. They haven't gone into default yet, but they might have missed a payment or two, or showing some other signs of risk to incur higher losses. The other key element of the calculations is that we do a lifetime calculation over the entire term of an account. So if you think of like a mortgage account, it could be 35, 40 years into the future, which is whatever, 420 months of forecasting for each individual account. And then on top of having to do a lifetime calculation for each account, we need to do this across multiple scenarios. So we have 4 scenarios in our model. We have base, favorable, adverse, and the weighted average of those. Favorable is sort of the economy goes really, really well over the next few years. Adverse is economy goes really, really bad. Base is just sort of that things keep ticking along as they are. The weighted average then is just a simple weighted average of the 3 of those. So within PTSB, what does that mean for us? So we've had our IFRS 9 solution up and running since 2017. It's one of the few times we were actually ahead of the curve before the regulation said that we needed to do it. But we've been running it monthly ever since then. So that's just about 8 years running that continuously each month. As I said, we're a retail bank, so we run it across our main sort of product offerings. That's mortgages, term loans, credit cards, and overdrafts. We will calculate ECL for over 420,000 accounts, and it's roughly about 23 billion euros in balance, or 25 billion US dollars. And in terms of the data that consumes, it's just an absolutely massive amount of data, right? So over 4 scenarios, doing lifetime calculations for 420,000 accounts, you're looking at 400 million observations, right? And that's just rows of data. And with the complex calculations that go into these models, it actually expands the table, makes it quite wide as well as being long. So just to touch on kind of some of the elements that feed into those calculations, we've got, obviously to feed into our expected credit loss, we've got stuff like the probability of default. That's the likelihood of someone actually going into default and being credit impaired. Typically we'll take into account a lot of customer behavior data. Do they have other products with us? We look at their application data. For the loss given default, we will look at a lot of collateral information associated with each account. So, what property is the mortgage secured against? What details do we have about that? For EAD, that's your exposure. So that's effectively how much the customer owes back to the bank. And if we have an amortizing schedule for any, say like mortgage or term loan, we'll need to know what the exposure is at each individual time period out in the future. We also determine what the survival rate is for each account, and by survival rate I mean what's the likelihood that a customer is actually going to stay with the bank in the near term. So no more than shopping for utilities or groceries or whatever it may be, everyone's always looking for the cheapest deal they can get. Same applies with your mortgage in Ireland. People will switch between different banks to avail of lower interest rates, and we're trying to determine that too. And then, as I touched on earlier, we also determine what the ECL stage is, be it 1, 2, or 3 for each account. And these can vary in complexity from simple qualitative identifiers to really quite complex quantitative triggers as well. So prior to our migration to CAS, which we'll get on to soon enough, our implementation solution, we actually have 2 solutions for how we do this. We've got a strategic and a tactical solution. So our strategic solution was built in SaaS model implementation platform. This is the one that we actually publish our production data to. It's used for regulatory and reporting purposes, but there's very high complexity here. There's only maybe 3 or 4 people in the organization actually understand how this system or process works, and it's very rigid, right? So it doesn't lend itself well to being able to share with other people and get them to pick up and run the model. So in parallel to that, we have what we call our tactical model. This is just, it's built in SaaS Enterprise Guide. It's much more accessible. Users can pick it up and play with it. Everything is stored within a SaaS work library, and it's not going to break anything if someone runs it, right? So it lends itself well for many, many users to be able to pick it up and do stuff like sensitivity analysis, peer reviews, model development, whatever it may be. So we will typically share this with dozens and dozens of users around the bank each month, and they can use that. So that's the tactical solution is actually the one we're going to be focusing on today rather than the strategic. Sorry. And just a brief note about what kind of the structure that looks like. So like pretty much any banking calculator, you take some input data. Ours is based in a Teradata ODS. We've also got a couple of Excel imports feeding into it. We then apply some business logic to get our ECL calculation. After that, you output the data, and that allows for review and analysis where we can kind of assess impacts, gain insight, find out whatever we needed to find out from whatever variation of the model we're running. I forgot to put animations in this, bear with me. So just to give an estimate of kind of how much usage is going on with the model, as I said, it's shared among different teams around the bank. So ourselves and analytics processes, we might do 20 runs of the model a month. We'll share it to other teams like impairment and model development. In total, we kind of estimate that it's about 150 times each month that this tactical version of the model was actually getting run around the bank. So all in all, it takes 15 minutes prior to CAS migration, it took 15 minutes to run. So that's about 37.5 hours of runtime each month, right? Now, obviously, we can run different sessions of Enterprise Guide in parallel. We don't need to wait for one to finish before we start the other. But it does total to effectively a full working week of runtime in 37.5 hours. So that was our existing solution before we got in touch with our local SaaS rep, Sean de Villiers. He introduced us to the world of SaaS cloud analytics services, and Amy's going to tell us a little bit about that now.
Cheers, Kev. So first off, what is CAS? It's a server that provides the cloud-based runtime environment for data management and analytics. The main thing that attracted us to CAS is the in-memory processing. So Kevin mentioned there that there's around 37.5 hours of runtime. What we were finding is the tactical solution mainly runs on a risk and finance environment. We were experiencing a number of latency issues on that due to the demand of the users. So everyone was trying to run it at the same time for different sensitivities. This was putting a high strain on the I/O to the disk. This was actually taking longer than 15 minutes to run if everyone was doing it at the same time. We were getting a number of complaints. So when we talked to Jean about this, and he confirmed that CAS was in memory, it would get rid of the I/O with actually writing out to a disk because it was all handled in CAS. That was a big plus for us, and it was definitely going to improve like the processing time for the users. So that was our main selling point. And then with CAS as well, it also allows for parallel processing. So with our master dev environment, we have 4 worker nodes. So if there was a big query being run, this was able to be split out across the nodes and ran all at the same time, which improved the speed of the process overall, and everything was able to run simultaneously. So that was our main draw to using CAS rather than just switching over to FHIA, going on the compute server and running it as is. So with moving to FHIA, what did we have to do? Sorry. So the steps to enable our process to run in CAS. So we had to set up a CAS session and load the data into it. Then we had to optimize our own code that was previously ran in EG and get this to work with CAS. Then with that, we had to make sure we were managing the in-memory data accurately and making sure it was running efficiently. And then after that, we had to ensure that we were terminating the process and finaling out the process accurately. So we're going to touch on this in the next few slides. So this is probably the simple step, loading the data into CAS. You create the CAD session, then you load your data into library, and then we use the proc CAS util function in order to move the data into CAS and into memory. This is the main benefit for us, and we saw great improvements. So then, this was probably the main bulk of the work, optimizing our code to run in SAS. So as we mentioned, this all ran in EG. We had to adapt our code to make sure that it would run in Studio, use the CAS processes. So with EG, we did a lot of joins between proc SQL and hash tables. This isn't available in CAS. So what we had to do is we had to use Fed SQL in order to process this in CAS and move the code over. Proc SQL is quite handy because it allows you to query and manipulate the data and allow you to execute it like a SQL statement, but within CAS. There are some limitations to it. It doesn't have all the SQL functionality as a normal SQL program, but it is very helpful when you're using it within CAS. It also allows for an implicit pass-through to offload query processing. So this means it can execute certain parts of the query at the data source rather than having to load everything into CAS. And this is where we saw great improvements because, as I said, there was multiple people on EG running really extensive queries and then causing latency delays. So this really benefited us. And then in order to run in CAS as well, we had to use the group by process within CAS, and this allowed us to use parallel processing, split it out to the worker nodes, and run simultaneously. And then with managing the data in memory, what you use for this is proc CAS util. So this allowed us to move data into CAS, look at the tables, query them, and it also allowed us to drop and delete tables where necessary. It also gave us efficient operation control, like loading, saving, and dropping as needed, and it heightened the efficiency overall with the process. So they were like the main steps. That's at a very high level for us, but it was a very time-consuming task, optimizing the code. And then the final step was finalization. So it is best practice to make sure that you are terminating your CAS session at the end of the process. Like a lot of you probably program and you were aware you're not going to just close out a FHIA. You probably have a different process to run. So you're better off terminating the process at the end of your actual code. That way it frees up memory and resources for other things to be loaded into CAS. So we just had to make sure that we were doing that at the end of each process. So that was the kind of the bulk of the work at a very high level. And I'll hand you back over to Kev to talk about the key improvements of what we saw when we did migrate this over to CAS.
Very good. Thanks, Amy. So after we got through the migration to CAS, we noticed kind of 3 key improvements in our process. So first, as Amy touched on there, is the in-memory processing. You know, by shifting from disk-based to in-memory, there was a significant reduction in the I/O. We identified distributed parallel execution, and the CAS engine will distribute the work among different nodes, each node doing a little bit of the work and effectively stitching it back together at the end This greatly reduced the runtime of our ECL process. And as well as that, the optimized code execution, migrating from proc SQL to Fed SQL. There's a bit of work involved in optimizing it, but definitely we're reaping the advantages of it now. So yeah, just to revisit then sort of the changes in runtime that we saw as a result of migrating to CAS. As I spoke prior to migration, we were identified as taking about 37.5 hours per month. That's at 15 minutes per run. Our new process now runs in 5 minutes, which brings us down to about 12.5 hours a month, right? So saving 25 hours a month is massively beneficial for any organization, as you can imagine. If you extrapolate that over an entire year, that's an extra 300 hours of time to innovate, to develop, to do whatever else. But you're not sitting there waiting for your code to run. It's been really beneficial. So yeah, just the performance uplift, 3 times improvement in speed. We're finding an extra 300 hours a year. And on top of that, there's the enhanced trust. This is built out of the collaborative work that's on the VIA platform. The model is no longer housed in isolated SaaS EGP projects. The code is out there. It's more transparent. Everybody can see it. Anyone can use it, check it out, check it in, whatever they need to do, and it just builds more trust and integrity around our models. So yeah, that's been our journey with CAS so far. Looking towards the next steps, where do we go from here? So first things first is we're going to upskill the team. I think that the work that we've done in CAS was maybe done among 2 or 3 analysts. So next stage is to kind of just ensure that more and more people can get familiar with CAS, the benefits of it and how we do it. Beyond that, we're going to start to look at migrating other processes to it. As I mentioned at the top of the session, our team is responsible for a whole bunch of regulatory model implementation. So, with the benefits we've seen from the ECL, we're hoping that we can get similar benefits now from other processes. And then beyond that, we want to roll it out further and make sure that CAS is a tool that's utilized throughout the organization. So, it's going to be difficult to get people to adapt to change, right? That's obviously a difficult thing to do in any organization. If you want to say, hey, we have this new way of doing things, and yeah, we can say, look, it makes your code run faster, but you have to do X, Y, Z to get there. Obviously, that's going to be met with resistance. So, we've heard a lot of, we've taken a lot of great ideas from SaaS Innovate this year, but one that really stood out was Stuart from Aldermere Bank yesterday talked about the idea of doing maybe like a VIA launch day. To really get people excited about it and maybe like run hackathons and stuff like that. So that's what we're going to be exploring now in the near future as to how we can actually roll CAS out around the organization. And just as I touched on, we've got ECL covered now under CAS in VIA, so we're hoping we can extend it out to capital RWA, or to our risk-weighted assets, to asset and liability management, to IRRBB. And then as well, we do a lot of internal and external forecasting and benchmarking exercises, and obviously just regulatory returns, which will always have to be done. So the sooner we can get those done via CAS, the better. So that's pretty much been our journey with CAS in VIA, and takes us to the end of our presentation. So happy to take any and all questions that you guys may have.
Thank you. Thank you. Are you able to hear me? Thank you. So you mentioned about the complexity of the forecasting model and kind of exponentially growing, right? Like, I'm just curious, like, when you forecast the existing portfolio, you have a certain amount of predictiveness of how it's going to actually perform, but how do you actually factor in any new accounts which you don't know what the volume and the size is? Like, how do you scale up or scale down your portfolio for those kind of assumptions?
How do we scale up and scale down? Well, typically our portfolios are quite mature. Like month on month, you're going to get accounts closing, accounts opening.
Right.
They get built into the population. The forecast that gets applied to those accounts is kind of a standard forecast across the portfolio. So we don't need to take much consideration into if it's a new account or onboarding, stuff like that. There have been challenges in the past around, like we're one of the 3 banks in Ireland. There was a 4th bank up until about 3 or 4 years ago that went under, and we acquired a lot of their assets. So there has been challenges in migrating data from other banks, incorporating that into our processes. But generally speaking, the model itself, once you have the data and can feed it in, it'll work from there. Yeah. So.
So new accounts, the size was not a constraint for you.
No. It's I think the maximum term of a mortgage we can have is 40 years, and our model is able to take, I think it's up to 42 years we have just to be able to get the maximum term of a mortgage included. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. We were just wondering which solution you are using inside the SaaS Via platform.
SaaS.
So it's ran in SaaS Studio using CAS. Is that the question?
SaaS Studio.
Yep.
The whole solution, it's implemented in SaaS Studio.
Yes. So we had the code in Enterprise Guide. We transferred it over to SaaS Studio, and that's where we were able to optimize it using CAS.
Thank you.
Hello. I guess my question is about the data that you're using for your loss provisioning. So I guess on a daily basis, you're gaining and losing loans. And so in CAS, do you have a process wherein you are uploading and updating the data that's there for you to use?
Yeah, so our reporting cycle is on the last working day of each month. So on that day, we will take a snapshot of all the model variables that feed into our ECL calculator, and they're actually stored externally in a Teradata ODS database, and that they then get fed into the model, into CAS from there. So. Oh, one more. Why did I do that?
The question is around the models, like a PDE model. Are you scoring the PDE model within CAS, or is that already scored?
No, all the scoring is done within CAS. Yeah, we load in all the behavioral variables, application variables. We consider some of the data from the other products that a customer may have, combine all those together, and produce a PD score from that. Yeah.
And the models are being used in CAS? I mean, so you're using Model Manager in CAS, or are you bringing it over from the 9 side?
Oh no, it's pretty much straight ripped from SAS 9, so more or less taken directly from what we had in Enterprise Guide, just directly into Studio. So we don't actually use Model Manager for this aspect of it.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Oh, I think, no, she was just doing stuff with her hands. No more. All right, thanks folks. We'll see you at Universal Studios later.
Thanks, everyone.